Welcome, Brandon. How's it going?
Hey, Marcus. Good. Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
Most of my viewers for the channel are 25 to 35. So
Sure.
for those individuals, what kind of tips and strategies can we offer them to sustain longevity with their training? What has been your secret?
I think obviously with training, the number one key to anything is consistency, right? So as long as you're training and you're doing it consistently, you'll see results. But that keyword is consistently, because I think something that can creep up to people, and I think most people have the mindset that probably as they get older, injuries are going to be more prone. And they're going to be occurring more often. And if you get injured, you can't train, and there goes your consistency. So I think number one, the key thing is to stay healthy, right? If you're looking to lift for a long period of time, you can't do that if your body is not working correctly. So as part of that, I think what plays the biggest role in consistency and staying healthy is smart training. Now, personally speaking, when I first started training back when the internet was not as prevalent with information as it is today, a lot of the routines that I got, I would just grab offline or off of a magazine, Muscle and Fitness, Muscle and Strength, Flex magazine. These routines that probably were what we would call today very cookie cutter and probably not overly in depth. It would just say, like Monday you train chest, Tuesday you train back, Wednesday you train legs. If you train legs, then you do arms. And it's like a bodybuilder type split, which can be fine for some people. But I think with information and as we've come to learn, frequency is also very important. So you can train stuff more often and oftentimes see better results, which I think is probably counterintuitive to what we initially thought, because we'd have to hit the muscles a lot and, really tire them out and give them time to recover and grow and all that. But I think what the literature has shown us these days is, you can train something more frequently as long as you scale stuff like volume. So how much work you're actually doing in a given day. And also intensity, I think is a big key thing. And then again, to get back to my initial point of just finding stuff online that's not very well thought out or cookie cutter, it doesn't really take those things into account. It just says, do this exercise for this amount of sets and reps at this percentage, which for a lot of people over time isn't really sustainable. And that's even considering if they even gave you a percentage. I might have just been, hey, do 3 sets of 10 on this and with no guidance whatsoever. And I think while initially a lot of people can kind of get away with that, over time, what they find is they get injured, whether it be from a form breakdown issue because they're going too heavy. Maybe it's a tendonitis type issue, whatever the case may be. It's just not really set up with a long-term goal and plan. So my first bit of advice to anybody in terms of consistency is smarter programming, right? Get on something that is a proven program that people have run time in and time out, has shown results. That could be something that you might have to spend money on in some instances, which definitely isn't the case. You can find plenty of free examples as well, but try to shy away from just finding stuff that's not tested or something that you come up with yourself, just because I think a lot of people get in the rut of, hey, I'm just going to program for myself, which I have found, personally speaking, doesn't always give the best results, but also can lead to those issues because, again, you don't have that longer timeline in play. So number one, first and foremost, get on a program that's well thought out and has kind of that long-term goal and plan. So like what I do now is I have different phases of stuff that I do where I'll work in a hypertrophy block where I have certain goals. I'll have a strength block for me competing in powerlifting. I'll have that planned in as well. But it's really good to visualize some of that on paper too, to see, as I'm increasing the volume, my intensity is probably going to have to come down because I'm not going to be able to do super heavy weights for lots and lots of work sets. But on the flip side, as I increase the weights and get heavier and heavier, the volume can come down in that case, just because, again, it can't sustain. So there's like this kind of checks and balances that I think people need to find. And I think that can be applied in a lot of things. But definitely for training, I think that's the main takeaway is get on a program that's going to set you up for success. Because if you're on one that's not, you're not going to see the results you want. But also number two, it could potentially lead to some issues, which would keep you out of the gym overall.
Agreed. Yeah. And I was guilty of the self-programming a long time. And I had some really good results, but I also had two pretty bad injuries that still plague me today. One of my biggest regrets, going gung ho, you feel great. You're knocking out your own programming and you're doing well and it's easy. And you say, you know what, let me go for some more. Let me throw in this exercise today. Let me do a couple of sets of this, even though I didn't come into the gym with that mindset that I was going to hit that today. If you kind of temper your enthusiasm a little bit to just be realistic so that you are consistent, that I think is training smartly.
And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because at the end of the day, the biggest thing is just consistency. So you could be on a program that might not be what some would consider optimal, could be
Right.
more optimal programs that give people better results. But if you're able to go into the gym day in and day out within reason, not every single day, obviously, but if you're able to, again, consistently do that over time, no matter what program you run, as long as you're, maybe trying to add volume or add some intensity, I mean, you should, in theory, make progress regardless. But again, it's that kind of fine tightrope to walk that you're not doing too much to the point where you're going to keep yourself from being able to go and train, which is going to then derail you.
Yeah, exactly. So what else you got? You've been doing this for decades.
So you kind of alluded to it a little bit, talking about, how to be able to handle it and manage it and whatnot. And that's part of the thing that I found have been really helpful too, is by setting proper expectations, but also being okay with not sticking to the plan at all times. And what I mean by that is I was the type of person, and I still am to an extent, that like, if I don't train on a certain day because I can't, maybe I'm not feeling up to it, maybe there's something that gets in the way, that would mentally frustrate me. I'd be mad, like, oh, I'm going to not make my progress because I have to skip a day, or maybe I have to scale back the weights. But being able to kind of accept that and set expectations accordingly, and know that, again, you have to take a look at it in the long haul. So, hey, maybe you miss one workout this week. Maybe you miss two workouts this week. Maybe you miss a whole week of training. The longer you do it, again, to play in that consistency role, if you're talking about missing 1 week out of the 52 weeks out of the year, that's 51 weeks you're still doing work. I mean, it's not going to play as big of a role. And again, as you extend that out further and further, those individual workouts become, I don't want to say less important, but they're not going to sabotage necessarily the work that you're putting in. As part of that, again, to kind of tie into the smart training that I mentioned already, one of the things that's really helped me is doing some RPE based work. So in the past, I was very, I went from just doing, like we said, hey, do 3 sets of 4 or 3 sets of 10 of this exercise with no guidance on weights, to eventually graduating to, hey, do 3 sets of 10 on this exercise for 80% of your 1 rep max, to doing maybe 3 sets of 10 and aim for like an RPE 8. So for me, using RPE, where I'm basically able to come in and choose the weights or have guidance of the weights based off how I feel, meaning that if I feel really good, I could probably go above what would be in theory 80% and maybe hit a new rep PR or whatever, just feel good about myself, and not have one of those moments where we've all had, where we've been in the gym on a program and just say, hey, I feel really good today. I really want to push the weights, but I really want to stick to my program, so I'm not going to do it. But also combat those times where you go into the gym and you're not feeling very good and you're trying to stick to the program, and you try to stick to the weights that's prescribed because it's percentage based, and you end up getting hurt. So that RPE work is, hey, as long as it feels like it should, that weight might be more, that might be less, but it should be just about right. That's going to let me help continue on in my training without derailing me too much. So using that RPE based work and kind of work off my body has helped me as well. Again, stay consistent, stay away from injuries, and also in some cases still push the numbers further to what maybe a normal percentage based program would, which gives me great joy in my older age, because I set more of those multiple rep PRs than those 1 rep maxes these days. So I take what I can get at this point.
Yeah, that's a great point, to be able to assess how you're feeling physically in a real-time basis, to kind of understand gauging with RP. Am I good to go? Should I continue? Should I make an adjustment? And that's one thing I'm learning with the juggernaut training. Sometimes I do still beat myself up over not finishing an entire workout, and be okay with the fact that I didn't finish the routine. You made a good point with the RPE, gauging where you're feeling and being able to adjust on the fly if you don't have, say, a juggernaut or something else that is kind of guiding you along the way. So definitely a good point.
So I ran into something like that personally this past week. So last week with 4th of July being on a Monday, had some other commitments, which is fine. So I deprioritized my training. So I'm not going to train on Monday, which I typically do. I'll shift stuff in the week. And I ended up just training Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So 4 days in a row. And where I'm at with my current training right now, I'm squatting 4 times per week, all of sets of 10 or more. So lots of volume, relatively heavy considering, benching 4 times a week. So I'm basically doing that 4 days in a row. And I pushed through, I hit my numbers, again, use RPE. I felt decent, felt like I accomplished a lot. But then come the following week, I'm coming off the previous week and I feel like I'm dragging a bit, which is understandable, because sometimes like the work you're doing now, you might not necessarily feel like it's a detriment until you skip ahead a couple of days. And what I had to do is I had to scale back. So this past week, I still lifted what I should. However, I had to scale back some, and I ended up cutting out some sets and cutting out some reps, because again, I try to tell myself, what's the big picture here? And for me, I'm working towards a goal of a powerlifting meet again and a 1 rep max. And some of these things, while in theory, I might win the day. I'm not going to win that war necessarily unless I make those smarter decisions. So scaling back, knowing that I don't want to burn all my energy and my bridges early when the goal is still quite a ways away. And that's what I'm kind of working towards. So you got to really kind of be realistic with yourself. And I think once you are able to accept that more as a lifter, I think typically sessions and progress become easier and easier to handle with our older age and maybe are not as frequent of gains as when we were younger boys.
I agree. And I think that comes with the maturity and the experience and wisdom, still with the mindset of being smart with your training because you see the big picture. How far do I want to take this? I want to be able to sustain this for the rest of my life. So I need to focus on keeping myself healthy and injury free. And there's a lot that goes into that. We used to train to failure pretty much all the time, right? Every set, every rep. And that's not necessarily the smartest thing to do. Now I notice using RPE, as you mentioned, it's not necessary to hit RPE 10 on every set for every exercise, every day of every training week. So that was a little tough to get used to, so to speak, using the RPE gauge and pulling back a little bit. But I'm grateful for it because there's really no sense in doing that.
And I get comments from people who do similar programs to me initially. Like one of their big holdups is, I'm not doing a lot of heavy singles, I don't feel like I'm doing this training right. Like when do we start like doing 1 rep maxes? And I tell them like in a 16-week program that I run, I might not do, in fact, I don't do any 1 rep sets until like week 15 or week 16. Because again, you've probably heard people say, it's about building your strength, not testing it. So like the point of all those weeks of training is to get you ready for something. Just like if you're training to run a marathon, you don't go out and run a marathon on day 1, right? You build up to that and probably you don't actually run the marathon until the actual marathon day. But it's the same kind of thing with strength training. If strength is your main goal, you shouldn't be prioritizing those singles. You should be prioritizing what's going to help you get the best single when the time comes.
Yeah, great analogy. All right, so I got a question for you regarding nutrition because you've been training for so long. You sent me the site with all your performance stats. It's been impressive. You've been hitting some serious numbers for quite some time, over a decade easily. The funny thing is that you're down about 20 pounds or so from those days when you were hitting those numbers, and yet you're still equaling or exceeding those PRs in some of your competitions. And I know some of that is due to your prolific Peloton use, using that every day. And so you're kind of in a sustained calorie deficit of sorts, but not necessarily due to nutrition, but you are doing more cardio probably than you ever did. And yet you're still maintaining that strength. So what are your thoughts about that whole aspect?
Yeah, so I've kind of just like the weight training stuff, I've kind of run through the circle of life, if you will, where, when you're younger, you can eat whatever you want and you don't track macros. You don't know what macros are or calories. You don't care because chances are you're just burning so much through your metabolism as you're a teenager and in your 20s that it doesn't matter. You can eat whatever. And as long as you're somewhat relatively active, you burn all that off. I then kind of got into the whole macros and calories and tracking stuff. And I got overboard in it, right? So where I got like so fixated on, I have to log a food meal every single time on my FitnessPal because I don't want to lose my daily streak, that someone's really important, where it actually got to be a detriment in my overall life because I was so fixated on, I'm off of my macro. So that means I can't go out to eat and I can't do this and I have to bring my food and I have to pack my lunch. And then I've kind of reeled it back to more of the, if it fits your macro style, where as long as you're kind of within the range of your ideal protein, carbs, and fats, it doesn't really matter. And right now where I'm at is I actually don't track what I eat just because I've been tracking food for so long. It's basically like that scene in the Matrix where Neo starts to see all the code.
He is the one.
And like, I look at food and I can be like, all right, I can tell just based off what this looks like, it's going to be roughly this many calories, this many carbs, fats. I can get a really good idea. And I eat really consistently in terms of, my breakfast and my lunch are probably the same stuff time after time. And I've tracked those so often. It's like, I don't need to track macros unless I have a specific weight goal in mind right now, which I don't. But my advice for anyone for nutrition is I think tracking can help. I'm not saying that someone needs to go on and track every single meal and weigh everything out. But I think if you're struggling with your weight, whether it be because you want to gain weight and you can't, you want to lose weight and you can't, that's a very good kind of just rough indicator. So you have a baseline of, all right, let's be real about what I'm eating. I think initially, if that's a struggle for someone, that's an easy step to do. Just get a cheap food scale off Amazon, track your food for like a week and just get a rough idea of what your daily intake is. And then if you're trying to gain weight, just eat a little more than that. If you're trying to lose weight, eat a little bit less. But I wouldn't suggest, unless you have a specific goal in mind for a reason, like, hey, I need to be this weight, I wouldn't get overly into tracking, because it's just one of those other things that where if you're meticulous about it and you have that tendency to overanalyze stuff, it's just another thing that's going to stress you out.
But one of the things too that I know some people probably don't realize, the conflict of trying to be lean and losing fat while still trying to gain strength is a huge, huge challenge. So they might be doing their best for their nutrition, eating lean and tracking everything, but not really understanding how come I'm not really getting stronger.
Yep. And that's a big problem a lot of people have. And I know I've struggled with that too. It's like, say I'm in the middle where I want to be right now. And then let's say I want to go on a bulk. I want to gain some weight. I have the tendency to kind of go all in, which means I gain a lot of weight really quick. And then I feel like I'm just a big fat ass. So I'm like, this isn't good. So I'm not happy with how I look. Yeah, my strength might be encouraged by the extra weight gain, but mentally and physically, I don't feel as good about myself. Scale it back. And on the same thing, losing weight, yeah, you get, leaner. But again, if I go all in, I lose too much weight too fast, and then strength is sacrificed. And I feel just like I'm just skinny and not muscular. It's kind of that weird thing where, again, I think longevity and the bigger picture needs to come into play. So that's where some of those things can help, like weighing yourself daily. That's good things for just trending. So if you're continuing to add a little bit of weight day after day, that's fine. But if you gain, 5 pounds, 6 pounds in a day because you're just binge eating, probably a good idea to scale it back. So yeah, it can be a slippery slope for sure. And I think I'm past my dirty bulk and extreme cut days. And it's more, hey, if I want to lose weight, I know I just need to scale back a little bit on certain things. Maybe I eat out one time less per week, which I don't do a ton of anyway. Or maybe it's instead of, a big portion of dinner or something, I have a smaller portion, but it's all in moderation to the point where it's not something that's going to, again, make me stress out about. So
Thanks again, as always, for your time, and appreciate you doing this for me.
sounds good. Thanks, Marcus. Good talking.